Hello, my name is William Kane Portucker. I'm a neuroacoustic sound therapist here in Brisbane, Australia. And today I wanted to explain a bit about my practice, or quite a lot about my practice. This video might be about half an hour, which is generally the time that I speak to my clients before we begin a session. I usually show them through these slides I'm about to show you and explain to them some of the processes behind what's happening in neuroacoustic sound therapy. Now, in neuroacoustic sound therapy, we use the sound table, which is a table that plays low frequency sound, not like a vibration, not like a motor or anything. It's a sound vibration or mechanical pressure wave. We also use headphones, and we use a very, very sophisticated heart rate variability device, which I'll get more into later. So that's my laptop, which connects to the heart rate variability thing, which is just behind there somewhere. Basically, what the heart rate variability device is, it's these little electrodes that stick onto your wrist to read your heart rate, but we'll get more into that later. So, like I said, I've explained this to a couple of hundred people already, so I've thought it would be good to get this down in a video format so that it's a bit more easy and so that it's accessible to more people. Now, neuroacoustic sound therapy was developed about 30 some years ago by Dr. Jeffrey Thompson, who is my teacher, and I studied with him a couple of years ago. He is founded the Center for Neuro-Acoustic Research in Carlsbad, California, and I'm very grateful to have studied with him, and I'm very excited to have been the first practitioner for neuroacoustic sound therapy or biotuning in Australia. So I was quite happy to be a forerunner on that front. So I'm just going to run through some slides. I'll share my screen. Here we go. And we can see here, obviously, the human brain. And within that, we see this yellow triangle, which represents the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus, you can think of it as the master control center for our nervous system. So when we're in stressful situations or when our body's experiencing a state of rest or our nervous system is in a state of rest, the hypothalamus is what is controlling that function essentially. It's sending and it's diverting energy to either system, and that's its job among many other jobs. But we can have a little deeper look in here and maybe understand a bit more. The posterior hypothalamus here is connected to our sympathetic nervous system or our stress response, which I'll show you a bit more about that soon. And the anterior hypothalamus, this little mini organelle, is responsible for the parasympathetic nervous function, and that is our rest response. So this whole green blob is our hypothalamus, and then it has organelles within it. So you can imagine all of the other functions it performs with all the other organelles, but we're not going to go into those. And we can see here the cross section of the brain. The hypothalamus sits just here. The pineal gland, which a lot of people are familiar about here, and the pituitary gland just here. So here is another little viewpoint of it in a different kind of format. We have the posterior here and we have the anterior here. And now into the nervous system, which many of you will already know. We have our stress response or our sympathetic nervous system, or a parasympathetic nervous system, which is also called the rest and digest response. Those are very vague descriptions. It is a lot easier to explain to people using rest or stress. But in a more, obviously our bodies are hugely complex and they do, it's not that simple. but we're not going to go into that too much today. A lot of people would probably be familiar with the vagus nerve, and vagus nerve is cranial nerve number 10, just here. And that is one of these here. And we can see the vagus nerve here as well, cranial nerve, and that's the rest response or parasympathetic nervous system connects directly to our organs, whereas the sympathetic nervous system goes through the sympathetic chain. The reason that you hear a lot about the vagus nerve is because it's very important for rest response. And the reason we hear about it so much is because it's the predominant nerve in our parasympathetic nervous system. It's, don't quote me on this, but it's, I believe the mass of it is 75% of all of our nerves in the parasympathetic nervous system. So a huge portion. You think of it like electrical cables, and you think about, you have one gigantic electrical cable that's 75% of all the other smaller cables that are going to a certain system. You imagine the power that is being put through that, the amount of signal, the amount of energy that is being put through that one cable. So that's the vagus nerve, and that's why a lot of people talk about vagus nerve stimulation. And on a side note, what happens when we are lying on the sound table is that vagus nerve stimulation, a huge part of it is low frequency vibration. So when we're having low frequency vibration played through our whole body, it's an incredible parasympathetic nervous stimulant or vagus nerve stimulant. And yeah, it's a great tool. A lot of people talk about singing with the vagus nerve to stimulate the vagus nerve, which is also a good way to do it. It's kind of like doing vibro-acoustic therapy without having a table, just singing like Now we move on to a different perspective of the nervous system. So this is looking at it physiologically in how the whole system is connected. And now what we're going to do is look at it on a computer screen. So heart rate variability is the technology that allows us to visualize the energy flow of our nervous system. So we can see here, we have our stress response in blue, sympathetic, and we have our parasympathetic or rest response in green. Now, heart rate variability is a device which takes lots of measurements between our heartbeats and also in between these other peaks as well. Calculates all of those spaces and the variability between those spaces, and is able to tell us whether we're in stress, whether we're in rest, how much energy is in one or the other or both at the same time. And that gives us a readout. You can't see it. You might be able to see it a bit better in the next slide, which is here. Yes. So this is essentially what my laptop looks like, just back there. And you can see our stress response and our rest response. You can see our heart rate here. And the rest of these screens are giving us a different perspective on the same information. So this information that we see here, 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 and here are all the same, but they're different perspectives, different time scales, different viewpoints. And heart rate variability gives us a read of very low frequency, blue, high frequency in green, and very high frequency in gray. But there you go. You can see the gray over here. Now, forgive me, this is always a lot of information, so bear with me and don't be too hard on yourself for trying to follow along. So what we're seeing here is the very beginning at this 2 minutes here, which is when the heart rate variability begins to show on my computer screen. And you can see this response is the stress response is going smaller. Now, the reason that that's going smaller is because as soon as it hits 2 minutes, I press sound sweep on my computer, and it plays a sound sweep through the lounge, the sound table. And what that's doing is moving our nervous system with a sound wave to homeostasis, and homeostasis represents this crossover section here. So we're moving the nervous system towards homeostasis of the sound wave. And the sound sweep sounds like, oh, and it moves between 50 hertz and 200 hertz and back and forth, but a lot slower than that. So we are actually resonating our nervous system to homeostasis with a sound wave. And once we get to homeostasis here, my computer captures the sound frequency very, very specifically, like say 149.912 hertz. Then this is your fundamental frequency. This is what we use to cause homeostasis in your nervous system. We keep this frequency and we create a soundtrack, like a meditation soundtrack, so that you can listen to once a day and retrain your nervous system to homeostasis by using this sound frequency. So I guess that's the first fundamental principle of neuroacoustic sound therapy. We have two main principles. This is the first very important one, your fundamental frequency. And so now that we have your fundamental frequency, we move on to our second principle, which is brainwave entrainment. And brainwave entrainment achieved through binaural beats, which I will show you in a second. So brainwaves, you can see here, we have these people hooked up to an EEG monitor, which is electroencephalogram, and that is reading the electrical impulses within our brain. We could talk a lot about that, but we won't, because basically all we need to know is the brainwave states. Now, some of you will probably be familiar with delta, theta, alpha, and beta. And just to quickly go over them, beta is what I would be experiencing now, and no doubt you would be experiencing also, is our conscious thinking, our waking mind. Alpha is a light sleep stage. Also, it's a state of meditation, a state of non-linear thinking, state of focus. So, yeah, meditative focus, I guess would be a better way to express it. Theta, responsible for our emotions, for our creativity, for our dreams, creative problem solving. And there was another one. Oh, our memories as well. Delta, deeper sleep and physical recuperation. This is very important in biotuning because this is where we go first. We always, with every single person, we always go straight to deeper sleep and physical recuperation, because what the goal of neuroacoustic sound therapy or biotuning is to, it's not about this modality isn't fixing anybody. What this is doing is allowing the body to achieve a state of coherence and connectedness within itself to be able to heal itself. That's the fundamental principle. It's trying to get the body to a place where it can do the work itself, because the body is very, very capable of these processes. And sometimes in our lives we get out of these places and find ourselves in a bit of a mess of connections and brainwaves firing at not incorrectly, but not coherently and cohesively. So that's what biotuning is trying to do, is to relax it, is to bring the nervous system to homeostasis and to bring the brainwave activity into coherence so that the body can essentially perform the task that it was made to perform, like physical healing and all the rest. So our brainwaves are much more complex than these four. So one thing that I love about Dr. Thompson is that he is a pioneer in brainwave activity. And it's not as simple as that. It's a bit more complex, not too much more. So we have beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Now, Dr. Thompson, or I'll explain other ones you may be familiar with. Gamma is also one that is quite well known, and one that's becoming more well known is default mode network. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of research on all of these, but default mode network I find particularly interesting. So default mode network was discovered in 2001, and it's responsible for 95% of our brain's function. And I guess the thing that I find most interesting about this is the research that's being done on default mode network shows a whole host of conditions that have default mode network as not functioning correctly. So we have it's a big list. Or autism, ADHD, ADD, Parkinson's, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety. I can never remember all of them. I have a list somewhere, but a lot of conditions have default of scientific studies showing a lower functioning in the default mode network. So that's just one example. Gamma. I can talk a bit more about the default mode network and other things later. But we have gamma, hypergamma, and lambda. Lambda was discovered by Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. Iota and epsilon were also discovered by Dr. Jeffrey Thompson. And so our brainwaves on is there's a lot more going on there than we understand, and who knows if we'll ever understand the brain, because I've met with people who studied brains at University of Queensland, and they profess how much they don't understand what the hell is going on in there because it's so complex. So brainwave entrainment. A lot of you may have heard about this already, so forgive me, but there may be some new information in here that you've not heard before. So headphones are quite a fascinating product, because what they actually do is isolate our ears. And usually what our bodies are built for is 3D sound perception. So we're built to be able to hear things spatially and to understand if noises are coming from there or there or there or wherever the sound is coming from us, and to be able to directionally focus our attention somewhere. But with headphones, it's isolating that ability. So what's fascinating is that when we play two different tones in the ear, we actually create a pulse within our brain. Well, our brain actually manufactures a pulse. It's quite amazing. So let's say in this image, for instance, we have 205 hertz in the left ear, and we have 210 hertz in the right ear. So what's happening there is our brain says, hang on a sec, this is something's like the alarms ring says, what's up? Something's up, something's going on here. Is it a threat? And our brain soon discovers it's not a threat. But what happens is our two hemispheres share information. They share notes, which you might know as hemisphere synchronization. And what happens in that sharing of notes is that this pulse, it essentially says these two things don't add up. We need to kind of rectify this by creating the pulse in the middle. And so that's the brain creates the pulse in the middle, which is the difference between the two, 5 hertz. And we can see here 100 hertz, 104 hertz, and the resulting pulse is 4 hertz. So 4 hertz would be 4 times per second. So something like that. So that's the beat that we're hearing as a result of the entrainment. So we can see here what I was talking about before with our 3D sound perception. When we have sounds coming from this, our right side predominantly hears it, but our left side also hears it. Our ears are amazing devices, which I won't go into detail here. So with the brainwave entrainment, what happens is this happens. From this, which is quite, as you can see, it's quite, just visually, it's quite scattered and a bit ugly. I guess the brain's not necessarily a pretty thing anyway, but yeah, it's scattered, it's not very organized, it's not very symmetrical. You can imagine the thoughts that are occurring in that person's brain, which is probably what a lot of ours look like during the day when we are living our lives in this modern world. So this is before listening to a brainwave entrainment recording, and this is after listening to a brainwave entrainment recording. So we can see the beautiful symmetry here. And this is something that when they were doing studies in Wisconsin University or Michigan University, can't remember, with the Dalai Lama and a couple of his monks, I guess you call them his monks, I'm not sure. They found a lot of things, but one thing they found is this beautiful synchronized pattern in these monks that had been meditating for God knows how long. They also found huge amplitudes of gamma, which I can talk a bit about later. So we have this beautiful coherence, and you can imagine how happy our brains are when they're in that state because they're sharing information. And yeah, just the connectivity that's happening and the kind of perfect dance and symmetry between hemispheres. So we have another little image here which represents a similar with the same thing. So this is theta brainwaves before and after synchronization with binaural beats. We see here again quite scattered, low amplitudes here, so not a lot of activity happening here. A lot of activity, or sort of most of the activity, energy or electrical activity is happening over here, a bit over here. So you can see that's not very cohesive. After 15 minutes, we have this like pattern starting to emerge, and then after 25 minutes, we have this beautiful, perfect synchronization and symmetry. So that's all achieved with binaural beats. This is, if you think about it, I don't usually call it this, but a lot of people like to call it a biohack, which technically it is, because you imagine the only other way to do this, well, don't quote me on that. I'm sure other people have lots of fascinating ideas, but you need to be essentially a monk meditating for maybe say, let's say 20 years, just for argument's sake, in order to achieve a pattern like this in your brain. And for those of you who want to learn more, if you look at Maxwell Cade's work with the mind mirror, he went around the world searching he wanted to know what awakening looked like on an EEG device. And he found a lot of things, which is very fascinating read. So there's a lot of studies being done on binaural beats, and also being said when I was back here talking about brainwaves, there's a lot of studies being done on certain conditions and the associated brainwave activity. So yeah, lots of studies being done on binaural beats. And even here in Australia, I noticed that just the other day, and not just the other day, a couple of weeks ago, the ABC had a paper out about, or article about binaural beats. So I thought, yay, there's people are talking about it. So those are the two fundamental principles. We have homeostasis, our fundamental frequency, very specific frequency to resonate our nervous system to homeostasis, and by repeated listening to train our nervous system to achieve homeostasis by itself. And then we have binaural beats to train our brains to a certain state which may have not been functioning very well. Say your sleep is impossible. We train your brain to the optimal state of sleep so that you're able to achieve that state, so that your body's able to run the processes it needs to run in order to sleep properly, in order to get that physical recuperation. In biotuning, we can go through all of these. We do one every session. There's 3 segments of delta. There's 2 segments of default mode network, but I think that's all. There's a couple of others. Anyway, there's a lot in there. But there's 3 segments of delta, which are very important. And we were at here. So the sound table is playing, like I said before, is playing low frequency vibration through into your whole body, which the FDA approves Vibro-Acoustic therapy for decreasing inflammation, increasing circulation, decreasing pain. So those are very important things if you're experiencing problems like that. And we have lastly another component of it, I guess, is the voice. So we take a vocal print and replace when we have your fundamental frequency, we replace that with a vocal print, your vocal print, to further extend the healing process. So rather than using a sine wave of your frequency, we record your frequency, we record a vocal print of you humming or just your frequency. Now, the way we record that is with specialized 3D microphones, which actually go over your ears. So when you're singing, you're not listening to your voice from a microphone over here. Because if I'm singing into this microphone, when I listen back to the recording, it's as if I'm a person over here listening, a person out away from me. But when I record with 3D microphones over top of my ears, I'm listening to myself, truly listening to myself, because I'm listening to the sound of myself from me, from my own ears. So that's why we use special microphones for recording the voice, because our bodies are a lot more clever than we think. Intuitively, our body knows that sound is coming from somewhere outside of ourselves, but if we record ourselves correctly, we can mitigate that small amount of stress. So that's it for now, and I'm sure that I have missed a few things, but I would love to know what you think about this, and so if you have any comments or suggestions, I would love to hear from you. And of course, contact me, book in for a session for me if you're in town or if you're coming to Brisbane. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to see you. Thank you so much. You can head to my website or Instagram or Facebook, scienceofsound.com.au, or will@scienceofsound.com.au. On Instagram, I'm scienceofsound_. You'll be able to find me somewhere. Talk to you soon.